Right. Okay, I'm going to grab one of these. In fact, I'm going to grab one of these. I think there's a glitch with the machine. Anyway, we'll come back, we'll come back to that. I'm going to grab a warm drink because it is absolutely blooming freezing. Winter has well and truly taken hold this week. Last couple of days have been pretty chilly. Hence the hat, which incidentally is available in the shop. If you want to go on our website and get yourself a Retropower beanie, please do, because the stuff is shifting pretty fast at the minute in the run up to Christmas. Right, let's go and check out this cram-packed workshop. I now have a date where we will have some space because Utah and the Cortina will be leaving us, I think it's Tuesday next week. So on Utah, we've done the last couple of jobs we were on with. One was the putting some downlighters in the underside of the sort of lower dash to illuminate the centre console. Because although the climate control controls are backlit, the sort of chicken head switches that we use to do the various other controls don't have any illumination on them, and one thing the owner had noticed when he was driving it at night, you couldn't really see where the switches were. So we've done a couple of little LEDs just downlighting a little pool of light over those, which has worked really well actually. We have now successfully got a DAB aerial in it that works, which is fantastic. Slightly frustratingly, it had to be one of those stick to the windscreen type ones, which is not as visually appealing as the ones we'd used originally, but actually the aerial functioning is perhaps preferable to something stuck in your windscreen, or is more of a priority. And we've done a long-awaited little plaque for the slam panel. We normally put a little engraved Retropower plaque on most of the cars that we do. Never got around to it on that because it was leaving us so quickly when we finished it, but finally got around to doing that. And actually, similar for the Mustang, because we know the Mustang's imminently going to be reaching completion. We've done our own little Mustang chassis plate with our logo on it as well onto that. Trying to think what the other things were on the Mustang. The wheels, they are now in the country. I think they're probably on a pallet now, wending their way to us. So it's Thursday today. I'm guessing if we're really lucky tomorrow, but certainly by next week's video we should have those. Adam was finishing off the steering column, so the eagle-eyed viewers will probably have noticed that the Mustang steering column was lurking in the body shop, and that's because when we did the swap over to the Borgeson type power steering box, you have to shorten the steering column outer. So when that was done, it needed repainting, hence why that was next door. So Adam's been putting that together, and the aircon, another job that was on my to-do list, but had never really reached the top of the list because it's not an essential thing, definitely not an essential thing at the minute, but air conditioning. So we've gassed and tested the aircon, that went perfectly. Lovely cold, you know, I was seeing sort of 0 to 1 degree at the vents, so happy with how that's gone. So yeah, as soon as we got the wheels on that, test drive, we're about ready to go. Jim's been doing the boot carpet as well, so Dean's just edge whipping the main sort of carpet section in the boot. But then to do the sort of curved shapes over the wheel wells, we're using like a more stretchy material. It's just a van liner basically. Look, it's like a thin, stretchier carpet, which is not very hard wearing, so you wouldn't want to use it for the main boot carpet, anything that takes any wear, but over the sort of really shapely areas, it's much easier to use that because it conforms to the shape. So Jim's done that on the arches, and then we've done some just hardboard side panels which have been wrapped in the same stuff. So the boot's looking good, just waiting for the carpet from Dean, which I think will be here tomorrow. So yeah, all going well on the Mustang. E-Type, that has been largely organising parts and starting refurbishment. So I think last week the owner was here and he dropped off all of the parts that he had for the car, and the sort of next step then was just for us to go through every single part and go, are we going to use that, and is it restorable? In some cases it's just not economical or even possible to restore the parts, so you're straight into new parts. We know we're going to be upgrading some things, so for instance the wiring loom's redundant because we're going to be designing a whole new wiring loom based around a PDM electronics, so we know that's not necessary, and basically going through every part and going, well, do we need that? Put it in either a restore pile, a redundant pile, which will either go back to the owner or be scrapped or sold or whatever, and then a replacement sort of pile which is tied in with the scrap pile basically. So we've now got a list of everything we need to order for that car, and Adam started making some headway into refurbishing bits. So I saw earlier today he was starting to strip down the pedal box and blast the various parts of that. So the pedal arms are blasted, they're ready for paint now. The sort of housing of the pedal box has been bead blasted. I think they're getting quite a few parts ready for Xylan coating, so a lot of the underside parts or parts where there are mating faces where we don't want additional build-up of material will be Xylan coated. So I've seen various bits over there ready for Xylan coat. So it's essentially going through component refurbishment planning on that, which is going well. So looking forward to starting to see that take shape actually. Lurking in the shadows over there is Kaiser. We've obviously been doing a total dash redesign on that. Last week we showed the revised knob design, George's CAD models of that. They've now been machined in brass by Andy Concept 303, along with the sort of moulding that sits at the top of the dash, because where there used to be it used to be in several pieces because there was an ashtray and another piece next to it, and we've made that one piece now. So we've kind of replicated the original profile but as one piece. They've all been machined in brass, and as soon as they're with me, they'll be going away for chrome. And then we've also, for the actual knobs, to reference the design we did for the quarter light opening knobs on the doors, we've done a little leather inserts for the dash control knobs, which have the logo of what they do lasered into them. So there's one for wiper, one for screen wash, one for lights. So once those knobs are chromed, those little leather inlays will be stuck in, and then everything can go together. I think Jim's just in the process of trialling everything electrically, so he's getting the centre console in. We're going to fire up climate control, fire up all the audio system, make sure everything works before we actually get to putting everything in for the final time. So that's going well. John has been on with the Camaro, so fuel tank is in, he's working on the fuel plumbing, he's been doing the vent line, so running a fuel vent pipe up high. It's quite tricky on those actually, because the fuel tank sits down quite low, and the injection tank kit comes with a little sort of breather filter on a bracket that says mount up somewhere high, and you think, but outside the car obviously, so the fuel tank vents outside, but there really isn't anywhere to mount it up high other than in the wheel well, and there's not room in the wheel well, and it would be subject to getting spray in it and all sorts. So what we've done is what we usually do on these things, of running a vent pipe that goes right up inside the C-pillar and then back down again, and then has the filter on a bracket under the floor, so it kind of bulkheads into the car, up into the pillar, back out to another bulkhead, back through the floor. So it's doing that, and then he's just been working on the filler neck, brand new filler neck, but as seems to just be the way with aftermarket parts, it doesn't quite line up, so we've just been doing a little cut and adjusted the angle so it lines up perfectly with the tank. But yeah, making good headway on plumbing. NSU, we've had the tyres fitted to the wheels, good old 80 profile tyres, look like tractor tyres, but basically they're the original size. So we've got the wheels and tyres ready to go onto that. We've now got the lower ball joints, which the owners sent us, so we're just going to have to sort out the top mounts, and then that's the last thing on that to get it rolling. Land Cruiser, Jim just done some preliminary planning on the exhaust system. We've been actually waiting for the V-band clamps to arrive, which for some bizarre reason took a lot longer than we expected. So we've done the downpipes, he'd machined the flanges for those previously, and he's done the first little sections, but we needed the V-bands before we could really carry on with that. So I think that'll be the next thing he's on with. Morris, done a couple of bits on the Morris actually. The grill area, George has been scanning the grill area. Now we've got the bonnet on and latched and finalised in its position, and the wing position is finalised. We've been scanning the grill area so we could make the bezel. You probably saw quite a few weeks ago we'd made a plastic hex mesh for the grill area, but we want to make a metal bezel for that. And the best way, easiest way to pattern that exactly is just to scan that whole area, and then we can just draw it. It's only a 2D piece, but we can draw it in CAD and just laser or plasma cut the surround then, so we can work on the grill. And also, likewise, we're going to do some little crescent-shaped brake cooling intake ducts that sit outboard of the spotlights in that grill aperture. So again, same CAD scan can be used to generate those as well, so we can crack on with those. And talking of CAD on the Morris, Finally, the mechanisms in the doors that we've had metal 3D printed have arrived. So George was able to do a mock-up assembly of those. All looks great. And that was the final thing we were waiting for before we got the exterior handles machined. So they're just 3D prints at the minute. But because in the 3D print prototypes there's a little bit of play and everything, a little bit of inaccuracy, we wanted the actual metal components that go inside and form all of the latch pivoting mechanism all together with all the bushes that they go together with, so we could then try the handle again and just make sure we're happy with the alignment and the angle before we actually get that machined. But we are, so we're pulling the trigger on machining those handles, hopefully get them early next week, and then that's the keystone then to the whole of the rest of the door build, because we can't really assemble that handle mechanism very easily with all the glass in there. So as soon as we got that in, we can put the glass in, window lifters, finalise all that, get the door frames on, and then we can just carry on and get the whole of the door build buttoned up. So that's good. We did a little bit of a tweak on the air filter. We made a backplate for it originally and got to hold our hands up, but it was slightly too far back. We'd offset it forward already, but it was a little bit too close to the bulkhead, and the plastic of the filter casing was just touching the bulkhead. So we've done a revised backplate that just moves it another 10mm forward, and to facilitate that, we've had to go for a slightly shallower trumpet on the intake as well on the engine, just because the curve of the filter, if you bring it forward, was hitting the edge of the trumpet. So we've gone for a slightly shorter trumpet, moved the filter 10mm forward, and that's all good now. So I've just mocked that up, it's looking fine. So we're going to paint the back plate and then get that on for the final time. That's that. Stratos, George has finished the tail light design. Those bits have gone away. We're actually going to do those 3D printed as the final fit part, so nylon 3D prints on a very high definition printer. And these are currently our prototype 3D prints, which aren't particularly unpleasant looking, but you do see the layers a lot. So we're doing a nylon 3D print final part of these, again on somebody else's printer that gives us a much higher definition finish. And then there's also, speaking of 3D prints, there's a trial of the badge / camera bezel in the back. I think we showed the CAD of that last week, so we've done a prototype 3D print just to see that we're happy with that before we get that machined. But that's looking good, and then I'll probably do another version of that but with a slightly curved rear face to go on the wings as well, but obviously there won't be camera badges, there won't be cameras on the wings. We could potentially incorporate the side repeaters into them if we wanted to, although that's only a thought that only entered my head just now. And that is about that. The Manta, no progress, because I'm just waiting for the owner to send me. He's been researching and sourcing the titanium bolts he wants to use on the split rims. He's got some samples now. He's sending me those so I can just be 100% sure that they are the correct length and have the right engagement on the nut, so that the locking part of the nut locks up nicely before he goes ahead and orders them, because there's a reasonable amount of cost involved in, I think it's 80 titanium bolts and 80 titanium nuts. And that, I think, covers everything in here. So I shall hand over to Nat to show you what's the latest in the metal shop. And I'll see you next week.
Well, hello folks, and welcome to another Retropower Uncut from the dark side in the fabrication shop, which is quite dingy at the moment because the weather has turned winters here, and yeah, we're losing light rapidly. But here we are at Project Kuma, the second of the two more or less parallel-ish Mark 1 Escort builds. And Sam's been cracking on, and Tom's been cracking on in here, sort of both to my right and my left. Sam's working at the moment on, in fact we'll start where he's working at the moment, which is he's tacked the rear harness bar in place that he made last week, and he's now just fitting up the rear bulkhead panel, which is just finished. He's just pressed the indentations into that for stiffening that up. Then that's going to be welded onto the turrets both sides, welded onto the boot floor, and all aligned and sorted out there. And that brings me on to the sort of floor arrangement that he's been working on. That the earlier part of the week was finishing off the sides of this, finish welding those, and then bead rolling the joggles. His favourite operation, joggling the recesses into the top, and then in the Pullmax, Henry Pell's nibbler, but we call it a Pullmax because everybody calls them Pullmaxes, putting the big T-shaped bead into the centre of that, the big reinforcer that sits into the centre of that. So he's got that all in place, sorted out, got that in. As I say, he's pretty much just getting set up to put the rear bulkhead panel and the harness bar in. So all good progress there. The chassis rails sections are all finished there, so next steps will be harness bar, get that fully welded in, get the rear bulkhead in, make sure everything's square and true there, and then get the parcel shelf section in, which is 3 pieces in there. We've got a plasma out, the CNC plasma, cut the centre section and cut the side sections, fettle them and fit them, fold them, whatever, to get them to fit, and then move on to getting the boot floor all done. So yeah, all progressing well there. And then at the front, Tom's been metal finishing the dash. He's TIG welded these rather nice end sections into place, done a lovely job of that, TIGged all that in place, cleaned all that up, straightened everything out that needed chasing and straightening and tidying, so that's all done, that's looking really good. It's got that fixed in place to the upper dash, and then moving on from that, starting work on the binnacles. You'll remember from previous episodes, he'd already made the steel binnacle housing, if you like, the instrument housing that goes into here, that holds the speedometer and the rev counter in there. Well, but it's not in there. He made the one for the first car. He's now making the same for this, getting that to the same stage. Now we've got the seating positions finalised in Project 1, the first of the 2 cars. We can use that seating position to set the eye line. The owner of that is a similar sort of height, upper body height to me. So we can use my eye line on the instruments, and it'll be close enough to his eye line that it'll be correct. So we can sight the instruments up, get the alignment of those correct. And then at that point we'll make Tom will make, Tom will make the fairings for the top and bottom of the panel. We make a steel fairing that fairs that binnacle into the dash, and then there'll be a fiberglass pad made for the dash, which actually covers the top of the dash from this swage line here up to this line here. Well, it's a very slight curve. That'll have the vents installed through it. We cut 2 more holes in the dash either side for the other 2 vents. We have 4 vents, and then they will hold that pad in place. There'll be some studs on the pad as well to additionally hold it in place, and then the steel fairings on the binnacle, top and bottom, then blend that smoothly into that upper dash pad and the lower dash metalwork. It'll all make sense when you see it. We've done that bit before, and it does look quite smart. So yeah, that'll be the next stage on that, and then each of those parts will be 2 off. We need 2 for, there's an upper fairing and lower fairing. There'll be 2 of each, one for each car, so there's a complete setup for each car. So yeah, all progressing really well. Actually, really coming along very nicely on here, making steady progress. Sort of trying to run this car semi in parallel to the other car. We want to get the other car finished first, so that we can move that on to bodywork. But at the same time, it's often more time efficient to just duplicate. When you're making a part, it's often more time efficient to do it twice. So we're juggling getting that car finished first with where we can in terms of time efficiency, let's duplicate the parts. So we'll cover a bit more on that when we get to Project 1 in a minute. Prior to that, we'll go and whiz by the Churchill Jaguar, where Stu, much to his own relief, has moved along from doing the bulkhead area, which he's been working on for a long time, to finally he's got all that finished welded and all done, and he's very glad to be leaving that behind him, because it's been quite an unpleasant sequence of fabrication involved in there. It's just quite a long slog, pretty determination sapping might be might be a good description. I think there's a certain level of focus and determination required to keep slogging on bits like that where they're awkward to get at. It's very hard to not shortcut jobs like that, and Stu hasn't. He's just kept plugging away at it and got it done right, so it's all right. It's good, it's excellent, it's all in place and done. So he's now moved on to, by comparison, an easy access area, which is that in order to install the air conditioning compressor, we're not fully sure whether we're going to use the Jaguar type air conditioning compressor or just an off-the-shelf Sandon unit, which will be very similar in terms of packaging, but slightly different size and slightly different mountings. But in either case, we needed a little bit more space in the inner wing area in the engine bay, where the air conditioning compressor lives, which is just over that side on the front corner. Interestingly, that's in the same sort of ballpark as these cars originally had their remote brake servo. And in a similar fashion, to anybody that's familiar, I'm just peering in to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn here, but no, I'm correcting what I'm about to say. In a similar fashion to the original setup, that had a removable bolted panel that gave access to the servo on the inner wing on a Mark II Jag. Stu's filled in the section of inner wing that was unboltable before, smoothed all that off and blended all that in, and basically tidied up that whole area, and then made a new access recess, which is shaped really nicely. Made a shaped initial recess in the wing, and then an additionally shaped and crowned cover that bolts into that recess, which gives space for the air conditioning unit, but then unbolts to give access to remove the air conditioning compressor. So it's really nice way of doing it. Really easy access. You know, just chuck the car up a little bit, put it on right-hand lock, and you've got access to change it should you need to do that, and also to get at pipes and that side of things. So yeah, lovely job there. And then moving on to the front, he's picked up where he'd started some time ago. It would have been covered quite a long way back. Was carrying on with the front end sheet metal work, which would be a nice, almost feel like a holiday after doing the bulkhead area, doing the front end metal. So you've seen all this upper part before. This was all pieced together and cleccoed in place. But the lower sections, he's now started work on the lower sections, the air intake area, wire edging that, doing the cutout for that, and doing the lower sections at the sides and getting all that metalwork to flow so that we can get the flow correct into the wheel arch, and then from the wheel arch back into the sill. So all the lower front end metalwork, he's just re-picked that up, but carrying on with the lower sections. So yeah, watch this space on that one. That's all going to be nice visible progress to see on the outside of the car that'll make things look like they're moving forward on the outside, as well as the sort of nitty-gritty detail stuff going on the inside. We've also been going through some of the, in order to work out what we're doing in terms of engine bay metal work, we've been going through a few areas to do with the engine and just planning things a little bit engine-wise. And manifold-wise, that side of things, because we're working out the cold air feed, working out what access we need for a cold air feed in the inner wing, how that's going to be done, what we've got to accommodate there, and that side of things. So we're making progress on that as well. So all moving forward. So moving on to Project One Escort, picking up a few of the things we mentioned over at the Project Kuma Escort. Bobby and Scott have been working on this. Bobby's been doing quite a lot. He's put various things in place, and I've put things in place. So we've covered a few things up here now. But he's been working. The most recent bit he's been working on is the scuttle area. He's cleaned up the scuttle grill. I think we might have mentioned that last week. He's now fitted some new improved bosses to mount that scuttle grill, so that we're not relying on self-tapping screws going through things and bent little tabs, and we want some slightly more positive fixings. So he's TIG welded on some threaded bosses so that we can actually use properly threaded fixings to hold the grill in place. And then he's working on the screen wash pipe feed. Again, originally in the engine bay, we're not doing that. We're putting the screen wash feed from an in-car footrest type tank, which we've done before and works really quite neatly. And we need to then feed the screen wash through the bulkhead. We don't really want a grommeted feed in any of the upper sections of the bulkhead, because it's guaranteed to leak and leak water into the inside of the car. So he's come up with a little threaded bulkhead union with the correct size outlet to feed the screen wash into the pipe. I'm going to put that down so I can point at things. Made this little union. I'm really quite impressed with this for a bit of lateral thinking work, so I'll mention it specifically. It was really quite a neat thing. He wanted to be able to screw this in without any extraneous sort of flats or anything on here. So he's actually swaged it. He's actually drilled it to a size where it wasn't quite clearance on an Allen key. He's then pressed an Allen key, or the straight end, cut off an Allen key basically, pressed that in to the end of that, then swaged it down onto it, and then turned the outside. Pulled the Allen key back out, lubricated the Allen key first obviously so you could get it back out, swaged it down onto it, pulled the cut off Allen key out, and then machined the outside down. And it's really nice. So it's got a perfect fit hex down the centre now to wind it in and out, which is deep, so it's not going to turn, it's not going to spin very easily. Super neat. And then I say he's then turned the barb onto the outside, so finish the outside after doing the swaging. A super neat way of doing it. Really neat little trick that. I was very impressed by that for a piece of lateral thinking. I wished I'd thought of it myself. So yeah, really nice. And then he's got the little wiper spindle nuts all in place. Got the holes fettled for them because they weren't in quite the right places originally. And the scuttle pressing, they're not quite right. So he's got all that sorted out. So that's all coming together well. Under the bonnet, I'm not going to try and lift it up really now. He's been working on getting the lower steering column through the bulkhead. So he's fabricated it's like a canister, if you like, that goes through the bulkhead, which will then have a seal. It'll be like an oil seal. Obviously it'll be for water in this case, but basically we'll run an oil seal fitted to a canister that's welded into the bulkhead, which then prevents any water coming up the steering column. Because the cross member is solidly bolted to the shell and the steering rack's on fairly rigid bushes, there's not really significant movement, so it's well capable of being taken up by a normal rotating shaft seal. So we use a conventional shaft seal in the bottom of there to prevent road water and road mess getting inside the car. A very neat way of doing it. So he's got on with that and got that in place. Scott's been working on the seat mounts for the passenger seat. He's got that in, and then he's finished off getting those in, and then he's moved on to the front panel because we're deleting the original indicator locations and we're deleting something else, and I forgot. Oh, I know, the original bumper iron locations and the original indicator locations on the front panels, the new front panels, they're being deleted. So he's removed the returns from around those holes, made the patch sections for them, tacked them in place, TIG welded them in, metal finished them, got them all smooth and ready to go. So been working on that. I think he's actually picking up some jobs from some other bits and bobs at the moment, but yeah, he's been working on that. That's pretty much, I think. I'm going to check my notes because I have notes. Jamie writes me some notes to remind me of things I might forget, and I guarantee I will forget. So I'm just going to check. Ah, yes, that's the other thing. I knew there was something else. In fact, yes, two other things. There's the throttle pedal. We mentioned it last week about the Audi throttle potentiometer. Bobby's finished off getting the throttle pedal sorted out. Last week he just started on making the bent shaft, basically, that will eventually form the throttle pedal. Well, that's now done. That's all in place. Done. Correct spacing. Nicely weighted, everything's good there, so that's all set now. And then the other section that Scott's been on with is, he's just started on actually, he's just cut the parts, and I think he's folding the parts, is in the boot area. I've started drawing up the fuel tank and working out the fuel pump and filter and pipe routings. And we knew that we were likely to, there were two ways of doing it. We've decided on the way we're going to do it, which involves putting a little recess in the leading edge step in the boot floor, where it's a straight line at the minute. We're going to put a little recess into that, have a drop section in the bottom of the tank, as we normally do for anti-surge for the fuel system. Again, most people will be aware, but just for those that might not be, when you run a fuel injection system, you need to ensure that under no conditions can your fuel system draw air. On a carburetted, very old-fashioned car by modern standards, you didn't really worry about that, so a tank was just a big tin with a pipe out the bottom of it, and that was as technical as it got. And when you went round a corner and the fuel sloshed, the small amount of fuel you had left sloshed to one side, for a short while your fuel pump might suck up some air. Wasn't really a problem because the carburetor had an amount of fuel sat in it. A bit of air went in it for a bit, it just came out the top, and then more fuel went in. There was no problems, it self-bled, there were no worries at all. On a fuel injection car, that's not the case. If you draw some air, that air is going to get pushed down to the fuel rail, you get a blip of air go through your injectors, and you have a momentary loss of power at best. And if that's in the middle of a corner, that's really not a good thing. And normally it will happen in the middle of a corner when all the fuel surged to one side of the tank. So to prevent that, we put an anti-surge setup of some sort in there. People talk about swirl pots and things like that, separate tanks to the main fuel tank. You can do that, but it's complicated. You need a secondary pump to fill it unless you can gravity feed it. If you need a secondary pump, the secondary pump needs to have at least the same capacity as the primary pump. The whole fuel system becomes unnecessarily complicated. What we really want to do is gravity feed a section inside the main fuel tank that prevents surge. So what we tend to do is basically graft a little box onto the bottom of the tank that's fed via a couple of holes in the main part of the tank. That acts as a nice convenient baffle that's dead easy to fabricate, prevents the fuel coming back out, and then we draw the fuel from that, and we also return the fuel pressure regulator rail from the rail, return fuel back to that, so that's permanently kept full even when the tank's running almost dry. It's the last part of the tank to run out, so you definitely don't get any fuel surge. Anyway, that's a long round the houses description, but that little box is going to sit on the bottom of the tank. So Scott is making a recess in the front edge of where the boot floor kicks up. He's making a recess in that for that tank pot to sit into. We then do, in the bottom of that recess will be an oval cutout We're doing 2 female bosses in the bottom of that little tank, that little anti-surge tank, which will sit on a neoprene gasket which will seal against the bottom of that recess in the boot floor and enable our unions that feed the pump and also feed the return back to tank to screw directly into the tank and not need bulkhead fittings through the boot floor. Historically we've used bulkhead fittings, but we always end up with some quite awkward short lengths of hose which are just a bit of a pain to deal with. So I'm doing this one where we actually have a neoprene gasket, seat the tank onto that, and then have the unions screwed directly into the tank. I think it hopefully will just be a slightly neater setup than I've done before. So that's what between Scott and I are working on there. And then I've also just started working on the cutout tools, which I'm about to cut on the plasma for doing the cutouts in the front panel so that I can try George's rapid prototype plastic printed bonnet catch and bonnet safety catch mechanisms in the front panel. If that all works, then we can get those machined in stainless. So that's the other stage I'm about to get onto on here when I finish this video. So moving on from there, we will wander around to the body shop because there's several acres of metal and polyester in there. So since last week, you saw the charger at the point. You saw the charger at the point where the metalwork was on the brink of being finished. The metalwork is now finished. On Friday, we set the car up in our blast room for blasting and zinc metal spraying. On Monday, Mark blasted the car, I zinc metal sprayed it, and we've got it to the stage where basically all of the underside and the inside of the engine bay has all been zinc metal sprayed. And then Mark sanded up, did a final DA sand of all the outer surfaces of the body shell, and then got that into this grey, very high zinc content. It's a marine anti-corrosion epoxy primer that we use. People keep asking about what it is, and I can never remember when I'm doing this. At some point, we'll post some information on exactly what it is. It's a Salimix product. I can't remember the exact code number for it, but anyway. We've then put that on the outside of the body shell, done nothing, not on the underside, that's all just the bare zinc metal spray underneath. But all the areas that weren't zinc metal sprayed are all now coated with the epoxy. And then following that, all the panels were final prepped and epoxied. I think the wings have just been epoxied today, haven't they? Are they today, Mark? Epoxied? Were the wings epoxied?
Yeah, epoxy
Epoxy on them, was that today? I lose track. Yesterday, yeah, I lose track of what. So we blasted the wings, yeah, yesterday morning. That's right. I lose track of where we're at. But yeah, did a final little. We did another blasting job on Tuesday for a friend of ours locally, and then tied into that, we also had a little nitpick blast of the inside of the front edge of these wings. There's an area where it's very hard to manually strip properly inside the front of these wings. So we had a little nitpick. We don't really want to touch them too much with the blaster. They're quite, although they're a sturdy thickness of panel, they're still easy to distort with a blaster. When you don't really need to blast them, there's no point. But in the front edge and around the edges, they're quite hard to manually clean. So we gave them a little flash over with the blaster just to clean them up. And Mark's done that, got those epoxied. And then in the meantime, Gaz and Steve have been cracking on with the primary filler work on the shell. Car's had new quarter panels, but inevitably they're a bit wavy. There's quite a lot of work being done. We didn't fit the panels. That's not to say we would have done any better or any worse. There's an amount of filler work required just because they are a bit wavy and they're a flipping massive long panel, so they're pretty hard to get straight. So the filler work's going on there. There's some filler work over the lead work on the sail panels where they were fitted, and basically, yeah, we're progressing with primary filler work on that. Then the rest of the panels, as you can see by the colour difference, these have been given a coat of polyester spray filler, which will give us a primary. They've been epoxied and then polyester spray filler. So then we'll block these. That gives us between that and the epoxy, that gives us a super high build to start blocking from. And if the panels were arrow straight, that would probably be enough build. As it is, they probably won't be. But we've got that on there, so that we've got something to block. So yeah, all guns blazing really with this, and making pretty rapid progress. There'll be some bumps along the way as we go, I'm quite sure, but yeah, pretty rapid progress. we had a change of plan on the boot lid after doing quite a lot of work last week. We hit a point where basically we could not keep tension in the boot lid skin. It was fighting me a bit last week, and we got to the point of going to put the lead in it. Oh, this is one of those things that we could gloss over and not mention, but I am going to mention it because it's one of those tricky bits of working with vehicles. We got to the stage on Friday, I think last week, I think it was Friday anyway, where we basically had to give up with the boot lid. At sort of 90% of the way there, we basically had to throw in the towel with it. I spent a lot of time getting the tension back into the skin, and we got it in. It needed quite a lot more filler than we would have liked to have put into the panel, but we deemed it just about acceptable. But it needed some lead putting in where I'd done the repair. And as soon as Gaz put any heat at all into the panel, literally just enough to tin the panel up, distortion just completely returned. Now normally, if you take the heat away, that will just pull back again. But it did. But normally when lead loading, everything just goes back. No chance on that. It completely distorted the panel. It was like I hadn't done any work at all on it. It was all over the place again. So there must have been a lot of residual stress in the panel. And I went to go and get that distortion back out, but just to no avail. It would have just been a complete dog's dinner by that point. So we gave up on that. Spoke to the car's owner and agreed that yeah, okay, we'll get a new panel. I had visions of that being a bit of a delay. Paid the FedEx Express delivery service from the States, thinking, well, that'll only be a couple of weeks or so rather than maybe longer. Ordered it on Friday. It was here Monday morning from the States. So all credit to Summit Racing and to FedEx because turned up from Ohio to Hinckley in a weekend, which is pretty impressive. So we now have the boot lid. I think that's in the booth at the minute in polyester. Oh, it's over there. Being blind. It's on the stand over there. That's in polyester. The guys are just sorting the hinges out. We're putting some captive nut inserts in instead of the floating plates that were in there. The end of one of the floating plates had cracked and broken, so we just decided to put some nut inserts in there. So they're just putting those in, and then they're going to stick the boot lid on, and we'll just do a bit of a fettle around and make sure that fits correctly. It seems to be okay, but we'll just put that on and make sure everything goes, hopefully, fingers crossed, according to plan. And so watch this space for everybody getting very dusty. So I think that pretty much sums up where we're at this week. And yeah, we shall see you again in a week's time.